Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Oh, it's nice to hear somebody say something back. That's always great. Welcome to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. So glad to have you here this evening. You are in for a treat. I have the privilege of being the Chief Executive Officer and of the AAAS and the Executive Publisher of Science. And you are joining us for the 2023 Charles Valentine Riley Memorial Lecture. And you are going to hear an amazing talk that I'm going to describe here in a second. And then you're going to get to interact with a panel that is going to, I think, answer some big questions and really, hopefully, spark conversation. That's what this building is about. This building I sometimes call it a monument to science on New York Avenue in Washington, D.C. We're 3 blocks from the White House and half a mile from the Capitol. And this is a place for discourse about the sciences, thinking about the future. And I'm going to tell you why I think that's so important. The first thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to hear from our honoree and lecturer, Dr. Joe Cornelius, the Chief Executive Officer of the Bill and Melinda Gates Agricultural Innovations. And then our moderator, Dr. Valda Vinson, who's the executive editor of the Science family of journals. And then we have our distinguished panelists, Dr. Saharah Moon Chapotin, executive director of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, and Dr. Daniel Robison, the president of the Charles Valentine Riley Memorial Foundation. Now, this place, AAAS, was founded in 1848. 175 years ago. And it brought together scientists from disparate fields. The whole idea was 87 guys got together, and they were all guys, got together in Philadelphia in 1848, and they realized that in America, there wasn't enough conversation going on between scientists. And it turns out that if you're going to do anything great in the sciences, you have to talk to others. You can't do it all by yourself in a silo. And so these 87 founders recognized the importance of a multidisciplinary approach to science and to address the challenges of their day. Things like, how do we predict the weather? What do we do about water and droughts? And worked on that. And over the last 175 years, scientists and engineers have made remarkable advances, huge advances to improve lives around the world. And we're proud of the role that the AAAS has played in that, recognizing when the scientific community and our organization have contributed not just to the exciting advances, but we've also contributed sometimes to damaging ideas. And that's why these discourses are so important. We make mistakes. Scientists are humans. And we sometimes have damaging ideas when it comes to the way forward. Now, over the last 2 years, AAAS has refined our strategic vision and goals. And as part of that process, we brought together a whole bunch of people, and we said, what is it that the AAAS should be aiming for in the next 175 years? And one of the things that you can feel good about is when that 2-year process happens, and you come back together and you reaffirm the same mission statement, which is what happened here. And our mission statement says, in short, to advance science and serve society, to sit in that intersection between advancing science and serving society. And the theme of today's lecture fits right into that. The theme of today's lecture is Reimagining the Arc to Impact, which is just incredibly timely considering this critical juncture in history where we're sitting. Science has an essential role to play to inform decisions that will determine the prospects for future health, prosperity, and peace. And at AAAS, and through important discussions like these, we got to consider lessons of the past to address today's challenges and ensure impact and longevity, all while leveraging the perspectives, expertise, and achievements that have been earned, sometimes in painful ways, through the decades. And we got to redouble our efforts to realize a boldly inclusive, mobilized, and global scientific community that has the power to ignite, enable, and celebrate scientific excellence and science-informed decisions and actions. Now, I read that part slowly because that is our vision statement. And I don't often diagram sentences, but when it comes to this vision statement, I do. The subject of that vision statement, the vision of what the AAAS is the scientific community. It's the community. And we talk about it as a boldly inclusive, mobilized, and global scientific community. Those three adjectives mean a lot to us: inclusive, mobilized, and global. Without those three adjectives, the scientific enterprise is not at its best. And then the second part of that vision is that global scientific community will ignite scientific excellence, enable scientific integrity, and ensure that we have science-based decision-making. Now you might ask yourself, is that the vision statement? Shouldn't it be something like stop climate change or save democracy? Look, those things are important, and the way that this organization can play a role in that is by creating that scientific community that is mobilized, inclusive, and global. That, along with the second part of that vision statement, is what's going to get us to a world that's a better place. Now, this lecture is going to reflect on how the history of science and technology has impacted agriculture and how innovation can help address the future of food security and environmental challenges. Dr. Joe Cornelius of Gates Ag 1 will discuss the crucial distinction between invention and innovation, how the power of agriculture depends on equitable access to tools, products, and practices that increase productivity, support nutrition security, and build resilience against global threats like climate change. Now, at AAAS, we are leaning into this multidisciplinary strength, and Gates Ag 1 also recognizes that viewing today's issues through a multidisciplinary lens is the future of problem solving. One person alone isn't going to solve the complex societal challenges before us. There are no magic bullets. But when we bring together people with a diversity of geography, a diversity of thought, a diversity of experience, a diversity of identity, that is when innovation tends to accelerate. And I often say that I'm an optimist, and sometimes I get laughed at for that. If you look at the news, if you're here in Washington, sometimes you get laughed at for being an optimist. But I am not an optimist because I'm naive. I am not an optimist because I don't know what's going on. I worked for 10 years on Capitol Hill. I am an optimist by experience. I'm an optimist by experience. I know that when good policy, good politics, and good science come together, good things happen. And so do all of you. I'm 50 years old, and so I have a scar on my arm from a smallpox inoculation. And if you are under 50, you don't have that scar. And the reason why is because good politics, good policy, and good science came together in the middle of the Cold War. While we were pointing missiles at each other, we eradicated a scourge that killed millions. That is a reason to be optimistic, even in the worst of times. And I get the darkness that's out there. I get the challenges that face us today. But there is a reason to be optimistic, and science is a part of that equation. And I'm pretty confident Dr. Cornelius is as well, because I've seen his slide deck, and I know that he believes in the power of science coupled with good policy. So all of us here today can help the global scientific community embark on this next chapter of our story with confidence. We can do that, knowing that we can ignite progress for the future of agriculture and scientific excellence at large. And this lecture gives us an important opportunity to explore the environmental and societal challenges facing our planet through the lens of agricultural innovation and its applications in a global context. Now, I know that you're all eager to get started and hear from our esteemed lecturer and the panelists, but I want to do actually the most important thing I was supposed to do up here, and I was actually filibustering to everybody get in the room with that short speech ahead. This is the most important thing I'm going to do, and that is that I'm going to thank the people who make this evening possible. I want to thank Dr. Daniel Robison, the president of the Charles Valentine Riley Memorial Foundation, for his commitment to promoting a broader and more complete understanding of agriculture. This lecture builds on the long history between AAAS and Charles Valentine Riley, who we sometimes describe him as a whole picture person, a person with a vision to enhance agriculture through scientific knowledge. And the connection is that he was the vice president of our biology section at AAAS in 1888. And this has led to our shared mission of promoting science and innovation for the benefit of all, and it's ensured that it's just as strong today as it was in 1888. And we're proud to have the Charles Valentine Riley Memorial Foundation as a partner. I also want to thank Ambassador Terry Branstad, the president of the World Food Prize Foundation, our other partner in this lecture. The World Food Prize's mission is to elevate innovations and inspire action to sustainably increase the quality, quantity, and availability of food for all. And then finally, I want to give a special thank you to AAAS Section O leadership. the intellectual descendants of Charles Valentine Riley. And that is the secretary, Dr. Lisa Ainsworth. Thank you, Dr. Ainsworth. So with that, I've now accomplished the most important thing I was supposed to do, and it is my honor to introduce Dr. Daniel Robison. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here.
Good evening, everybody. What a great day this is. It's so nice to be with you. I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to say a few words about C.V. Riley himself, so you'll have a sense of who this person was that our great lecture is named for, and talk a little bit about the relationship between the Riley Foundation and AAAS, and then have the great pleasure and the privilege of introducing our speaker. So first, thank you, Dr. Sudip Parikh, for that fine introduction, comments about the nature of science and our democracy, and how we're all trying to push forward to indeed make the world a better place. This is a terrific evening for inspiration and thinking. I have the honor, the privilege of being the president of the C.V. Riley Memorial Foundation, and so on behalf of the Foundation's board and its members, and indeed the descendants of C.V. Riley himself, both his family and his scientific descendants, many of us in this room would count ourselves among them, please know our great appreciation for the partnership that the Riley Foundation has with AAAS. It's meaningful, our missions are aligned, as you just spoke, and it's important that we do this work every year. I would also thank the same individuals that Sudip just thanked, and add to it Michael Fernandez and Joanna Mello Marquez here at AAAS, who've done just remarkable work, and lots of others who have really contributed in many ways. AAAS, our partner in this lecture, is dedicated to advancing science and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all people. And the Riley Memorial Foundation is committed to the more complete understanding of agriculture and the whole picture, which was Riley's idea, to deploy science to solve problems. These are important things to do. We celebrate the work and the legacy tonight of C.V. Riley, and we happily also celebrate the 175th anniversary of AAAS. So here's to AAAS. And I thought for sure, Sudip, that you would talk about the 175th anniversary. So it's my pleasure to do so. As you had just heard, Riley joined AAAS in 1868, a mere 20 years after the founding of AAAS. And there is no doubt that he'd love to be with here tonight. Indeed, his legacy is here and inspires us. A few words about this person. Riley was many things in his short 52 years. He spoke 5 languages. He was an immigrant, a world traveler, a farm laborer, a Civil War enlistee, an artist, a poet, a news and science reporter, an editor, an innovator, an education promoter, and indeed a scientist extraordinaire. We honor him tonight. His work on grape phylloxera, silkworms, citrus scale, monarch and viceroy butterflies, and as the curator at the Smithsonian Institution and the insect collection, as well as service for state and federal agencies, is indeed renowned. He is known as the father of biological pest control, biological pest management, and had among his colleagues, friends, and correspondents people the likes of Charles Darwin, John Wesley Powell, and Alexander Graham Bell. We are indeed talking about greatness. He was a most amazing and remarkable person, a role model for all of us to draw inspiration from. In light of that, it is now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Joe Cornelius. Joe, would you please come forward? Like Professor Riley, Dr. Cornelius leads an eclectic, science-based career devoted to enhancing the management and the quality of our natural resources and environment globally, to better our communities and sustain and enable vibrant life through food. There is no substitute. Contemplate that for a moment. There is no substitute. Dr. Cornelius began his continuing journey that now includes this pause, this evening, this lecture, as a farm boy in northern Iowa, up against the border of Minnesota, inspired by his parents' work and service, including both as World War II combat veterans. And he studied environment, crops, statistics, physiology, and innovation, earning degrees at the University of Delaware, Michigan State University, and the University of Missouri. His work has taken him around the world in service to agriculture, starting out as a USDA research technician, to working in Monsanto at their skunk works on crop biotechnology, with the US Department of Energy through DARPA, and now with the Gates Foundation as the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Agricultural Innovations, or Gates Ag One Group. Dr. Cornelius has been engaged in the development of more than 75 new product innovations, 8 startup companies on 5 different continents. And now, as you'd heard, as CEO of Gates Ag One, he is focused on the livelihoods of farmers around the world, particularly smallholder farmers in Africa and South Asia. He has received prestigious awards and recognitions for his work and contributions from the EPA, the American Heart Association, Monsanto Company, the Global Product Stewardship Group, and the International Association of Business Communicators. We hope the invitation for him to give this lecture tonight will be a proud recognition among his awards. Please help me welcome Joe.
So this just reminds me of my wedding day. On my wedding day, I married into an Italian family. And when I'm saying Italian family, this is a real Italian family. Farm boy from the Midwest, blonde hair, blue-eyed, now all of a sudden in this rather dynamic environment. And I say that in a very subtle way. My father-in-law gave me the very best advice on that day, as what appeared to me to be absolute chaos. I mean, people were showing up with parts of tuxes and parts of dresses and one shoe on, one shoe off. It was just total chaos. And my father-in-law pulls me aside and says, "Joe, from this day forward, go with the flow." I've been married 45 years, and it was the best advice I could have ever received. So anyway, good evening, everyone, and thank you for this incredible honor. It's humbling to be here in the hallways of the AAAS. It's humbling to be here amongst the distinguished legacy speakers and other activities that AAAS has been involved in. The title of the speech tonight, or lecture, is Reimagining the Arc to Impact. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. What would be a topic discussion that would be germane to all of us here in the audience today. And what I wanted to build upon was having the good fortune of having spent my entire life in the agricultural sector and having had the opportunity to, as Dan alluded to, spend a lot of time with farmers, boots on the ground around the world. But more importantly, to also be able to bridge that to a lot of the really cool science that is being accomplished by world-class academic institutions around the world and private sector companies. So hopefully today I'll make 3 points. First, which Sudip introduced, is that we're now living in an age of convergence, and it's occurring at a breakneck speed. So that convergence is creating entire new fields of opportunity for us in the agricultural sector as well as other sectors around the world. The second is the 21st century is Africa's century. Africa is the greatest untapped opportunity to actually enhance global agricultural productivity. We need Africa, and I want to talk about how technologies can be developed in partnership with the continent. The third area is in innovation itself, the actual arc to impact. Fortunately, we have a lot of experience in developing agricultural technology. The way we've done it in the past will not work going forward. So we have to think about different models and be experimental and develop new paths forward in order to address the planetary challenges that we have. For those of you who are as old as Sudip and I, and we're going to get out there and look at our star vaccinations, we can remember this day like yesterday. And what's important about this is that the Apollo mission, when it was first conceived, was considered to be crazy. You guys can't do this. Yet they did. President Kennedy gave this nation the gift of vision. Land a person on the moon before the end of the decade. NASA then came along and gave a mission to 3 astronauts. Now, who of you in this audience would sign up for this? Hey, you get to sit in a recliner lounger on the nose of a Saturn V rocket. It's never been tested, by the way. We're going to catapult you to a planetary object, but we're going to have to lead it because it's moving and we're moving. And when you get there, we're going to trust that gravitational forces are going to be able to slingshot you back home. And you're going to be able to skip through the atmosphere without burning up. That's essentially what they signed up for. Footnote: those calculations were done on slide rulers with pencils and blackboards and chalk. That's a pioneer. And fundamentally, Apollo 8 gave the world the gift of Earthrise. For the first time in humanity, we got the opportunity to see ourselves. We're alone, we're beautiful, and we're fragile. Fast forward 55 years. 2015, NASA is continuing to collect imagery. Now we have a much higher resolution image. We're still as beautiful as ever. There were 3.5 billion people on the planet in 1968. There's now 8.1. And the last I looked, there's no new land. The incredible thing about this, what hasn't changed, is when we looked at this incredible blue image, is the distinction of biology. What we have that nobody else has is the sense of life. And the great thing about biology, especially when we look at managing our planetary systems, is that biology is programmable, it's scalable, and it's economical. There's no other industry that actually produces its own carbon and then can sell it. Everyone else has to mine it, extract it, strip it, but we actually take sunlight, which comes into our atmosphere, and convert that into products of commerce. So what I want to touch on a little bit, just to frame up, we confuse innovation with invention very often, but they are distinctly different. Invention is a discovery process. We're actually discovering something new that didn't exist before. Innovation is a development process, which is about combining the technology and making it fit for purpose. And then impact is the result of our ability to deploy. So whether it's invention, innovation, impact, or discover, develop, deploy, what's important is you have to have all 3 of those in order to be a success. Apollo would have never been successful if you didn't have invention going on at the same time innovation was going on, and thinking about how that technology is going to be deployed in this space. And if you think about the light bulb, we always talk about Einstein as being this, the inventor of the light bulb. There are literally thousands of patents on lights. But what Edison did differently was he not only invented, he innovated and created the system and the infrastructure to deliver on that invention. And I talk about that because it's going to actually be important for the overall conversation. From an agricultural standpoint, we have a rich history of actually contributing to civilization, and many of us have had the great opportunity to have actually witnessed multiple green revolutions in our lifetime, and any one of them were miracles. So biology is able to continue to create in this space. This is the 175th year anniversary, and I'd like another round of applause for the AAAS and this was not scripted. This is from our hearts. I mean, getting that journal on a regular basis and being able to read it is the epitome of knowledge transfer. And that enables the entire scientific community worldwide to continually be in a state of movement forward. So thank you for making that happen, and looking forward to another 175 years. Switching gears a little bit, recently there was a report called the GAP report. It's data that's basically pulled together by USDA ERS. I don't know if anyone's here from USDA ERS, but thank you. It's like driving down the road with or without your headlights, and the data that agency pulls together allows those of us in the public and private sector to actually have insights that we would not have any other way. Anyway, this is an example that we've got a challenge here. Continuing the moonshot conversation, this is Houston, we have a problem. Total factor productivity is not on track. If we look at where we've been, not too bad, but when we look at the last couple of years and the last decade, it's the lowest level of total factor productivity. That's the output divided by the input. So we're not innovating fast enough, we're not creating efficient systems, we're not optimizing our agricultural systems in a way that will sustain a planet that is currently at 8 billion and on its way to 9. One of the tenets in agriculture, which has been repeated on every continent around the world, is that the gateway to economic development is agriculture. There are very few sectors that can make that claim. But that's the door you have to walk through in order to be able to develop as an economy and as a country and as a citizen. And we see the same trend happening in sub-Saharan Africa. The 21st century is Africa's century, in a small part because demographics is on their side. Currently, the median age in sub-Saharan Africa is 18.8 years old. Compare that to India, 28 years old. China, US, 38 years old. Japan, 48 years old. And not only is it young and hungry and vibrant, it's massive. By 2050, 30% of the youth between the ages of 18 and 24 will reside in Africa. And 1 in 4 of us will be African. So if you look at the next 50 years, this is Africa's moment. We're all familiar from a climate standpoint that Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia have been disadvantaged disproportionately. This isn't their problem. Well, it is their problem. They didn't cause it, but they're living it. Let's flip that equation and actually look at, if we're going to solve this problem, we're going to solve it partnering with Africa. 25% of the arable land on the planet is in Africa. And the largest system that's able to process carbon is agriculture and forestry. We need Africa to not only feed itself, we need Africa to help the rest of the world figure out how it's going to mitigate climate. And another small factoid is Africa's rainforests are greater carbon sinks than the Amazon. Whenever I pick up the newspaper, I see information about Amazon this and Amazon that. It's important, but Africa's rainforest is equally, if not greater, in importance longer term. It always comes back to how we invest. And when you look at the R&D dollars that we're putting into the agricultural sector, low-income countries are clearly disadvantaged, less than 0.5% of their GDP. That's barely treading water. Good news is, where we do invest, like in Ethiopia in ag extension systems, we see productivity gains. So there's a correlation between make these investments, we can actually move the needle in this space. And when we look at global serial results, we see that Africa is just a fraction of high-income countries, and this is a reflection of investment. So here's the good news. I'm going to make the glass half full rather than half empty. There is huge upside potential. It's untapped potential. And it's in the genetics, both animal as well as in the crop. Our ability to actually affect change is within our reach. It's pretty rare where you've got a global challenge problem and you actually have a solution that's like right there. Just do it. We've done a lot of land expansion because that's cheap, but that's over. We have to actually put a committed moonshot program together that actually allows us to increase productivity in this space. Only 9 countries represent 60% of that potential upside, and 3 of them, 50% of that. Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. We're living in the age of convergence, going back to the first tenet. Never before have we seen such an intersection of technologies in our lifetime. And it's actually accelerating, not decelerating. On the right hand of that curve actually is just a publication map. So looking at, in 2005, that represents the publications for biotechnology and for information technology. In 2017, 12 years later, look at the proliferation, the number of publications that are occurring in this space, and look at the overlap. In 2005, we didn't have a bioinformatics discipline like we have today. So we're creating entirely new sectors by the convergence of, in this case, computational data and biology. And you can pick a host of other sectors and show where that intersection is also occurring between agriculture and engineering, agriculture and robotics. This is exciting. It couldn't be any more exciting. For those of you who are graduate students, I am jealous. So the grand challenges from an ag standpoint, we're familiar with. We have to increase productivity and efficiency. We have to restore natural ecosystems, soil health, water, and we have to build integrated knowledge-based platforms that allow us to be more resilient. So I'm going to go through some exemplars here, and I want to move through this fairly quickly, but the good news is that science is delivering. We've got a lot of really good stuff happening. And the theme for all this to lay out for everyone in the room is that not so much to highlight the technology, but to tee up the question, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to ensure that this great technology actually finds a way to create impact for farmers everywhere? For farmers in Nigeria, Ethiopia, Illinois, Iowa. One thing about farmers that's great, if you meet one in one country and you pair them up with another farmer in another country, they're instant brethren because they're sharing the same experience. So photosynthesis is the holy grail in agriculture. And when I was at the Department of Energy, I never met a physicist that didn't say, this should be an easy problem to fix. It's just thermodynamics. Obviously, you guys just aren't, your experiments are just not well designed. Well, they don't have to deal with all the other things that we have to deal in biology, such as complexity, noise, and the fact that biology is conserved. But with that aside, the science continues to move forward, incredible progress in understanding plant metabolism, and as we're understanding plant metabolism, that allows us to actually be able to discover new genes, new traits, new pathways to increase that productivity. This is just a quick representation of two studies, or two bodies of work that are being done, one in Asia, one in North America, talking about overexpression of transcription factors, and the other in photorespiration. Having a strategy to actually improve a metabolic outcome is science. And that's what we do. Another example is in photochemical quenching. Basically, plants are inefficient as they're converting between high light, low light conditions. Think of cloud cover moving across the sky. Being able to improve that actually allows us, creates a pathway for us to increase photosynthetic activity and potentially yield. What's important, the main point on this slide, is that it's a very disciplined process. Designing the experiments, designing the actual improvement we want to make in a plant, then building the construct, the prototype, and field testing it with the appropriate statistical power so that we can make meaningful decisions. And then going forward, repeat. Design, build, test, repeat. That's what we do. Design, build, test, repeat. We're looking for needles in a haystack. It's a noisy ecosystem. When I was at the DOE and I'd put data up there and I'd show R-square values of 0.5 or 0.6, they would look at me like I've had two heads. Physical science world, you're not dealing with that kind of challenge. Looking at our restore bucket, whether it's soil health or root architecture, land management, incredible bodies of work in this space. The elephant in the room in this particular category is fertilizer. Arguably, the greatest invention of the 20th century was the Haber-Bosch process that actually allowed us to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. It's enabled 50% more people on the planet. But at the same time, it's created huge problems. 2% of our energy is consumed in fertilizer production, 140 metric tons a year of fertilizer, 5% of our greenhouse gases, and eutrophication of freshwater systems. And to make matters even worse, if you happen to be in a low-income country that doesn't have infrastructure, you either can't afford it or you can't even access it if you can afford it. So a huge disparity in our ability to even share what we have. This is so cool. When we talk about nitrogen and soil nutrients and water, these are three different strategies, and they're all working. First one is actually how do we develop technologies in the seed? Well, there's in the seed, on the seed, with the seed. In the seed, improving the genetics, and actually creating an ecosystem where the plant actually produces its own nitrogen through symbiosis. On the seed, by actually enhancing soil microbes, so that they are able to associate with plants, either on the leaf or below ground. And then, with the seed, developing modular, high-tech nitrogen manufacturing capabilities that are net zero carbon or low carbon. Another cool, and I'll just go through this quickly, designing root architecture that's able to penetrate soils deeper, access water, nutrients, penetrate hard pans in ways that were never conceived of before, and using new laser technology that is coming out of medical applications, coming out of military applications, coming out of mining applications, and in this case, this is tomography, laser ablation tomography, and you're looking at root crosshairs and lignin. And then finally, from a digital platform perspective, sensors are detecting, measuring, and monitoring in a way that we never thought was humanly possible 10 years ago. And I'll give you an example here. The challenge with breeding is that it's a very analog process. A breeder has thousands of plots in the field that they have to take thousands of phenotypic data measurements off of. It's labor intensive. It takes a long amount of time. It's not particularly accurate. And now with new robotic sensing systems and machine learning, we're able to actually automate processes that in the past would take days, if not weeks to do, we can do in orders of magnitude less time with higher degrees of accuracy. And the systems are deployable. I can use that system anywhere in the world. The most important thing about innovation is it has to be scalable. Here are 3 examples of, on the left, where we've got systems that are using hyperspectral, in the middle where we're using fluorescent plants, and then on the right, a program that is actually boots on the ground in Tanzania as we speak, using handheld cameras to actually provide artificial intelligence to farmers real time. And this is an experiment in Tanzania doing a very similar thing, being able to provide insights to farmers that before were totally unknown. So the key thing, and I go back to the 3rd point now, how do we actually increase our ability to take these really cool innovations in science and get them to the market faster? Historically, it's taken us twice, sometimes 3 times as long in order to be able to take an innovation to a low-income country. Good news is we have a ton of scar tissue. We've been at this for a long time. So we know where the pain points are. What we need is the will and the investment to actually think outside the box to actually address these pain points. So the fundamental learning in all of this, we have to be thinking about designing products from their inception with a focus on the farmer. It starts with the farmer, it starts with the customer, it starts with the market where we want the technology to ultimately end up. It means building local capacity, working with local experts in order to actually build that product out, and then it's having open innovation systems that allow us to test that product in a way that integrates research, development, and commercialization. So as we think about open innovation and collaboration, I'll quickly jump back to NASA. When Apollo started, it was at least a decade behind Europe and Russia and arguably some Asian countries. It was dead last. And NASA actually stepped back and said, we have to rethink the process. How do we actually assemble these technologies? How do we take these inventions, assemble the hardware, the software in order to actually make the mission successful? We have to do the same thing in agriculture. This is our moonshot. We have to design product concepts and technologies with partners that have that capability. This is where public and private sector collaborations become so important. We have to build fit-for-purpose technologies. So that means working closely with boots on the ground with the people in those geographies to ensure that the technology is in fact designed for their purpose. I can't take a product that I designed for the upper Midwest, North America, and expect it's going to work anyplace else in the world. Science may be global, but actual development has to be local, and you have to have both. And then you have to have the collaborations with all of the respective stakeholders to ensure that we've got the appropriate market insights and that we're building the appropriate regulations and policies that will support the technology. This is a moonshot, and it will work. It will work. We've seen it work on a small scale. No one's attempted to do this on a grand scale. But given the challenges that we're facing, it's absolutely imperative that we end up doing this now. So with that, I'd like to close and say thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Michael Fernandez. I am the director of the AAAS Center for Scientific Evidence and Public Issues, and it is, for the past 4 years, it's been our privilege to organize the Riley Memorial Lecture on behalf of AAAS and our partners. So my role here tonight is to kill time while our panel assembles. So assemble panel. But what I'm going to do first, of course, is to thank Dr. Cornelius for a wonderful and thought-provoking talk. So we give him a for being here. So next on our agenda tonight is panel discussion. So we're going to have a panel discussion, as you see the panel coming up here, and then we're going to have Q&A from the audience, both in the auditorium here and online. So joining Dr. Cornelius on the panel are Sudip Parikh and Dan Robison, who you saw earlier this evening. Also Dr. Saharah Moon Chapotin, who is the Executive Director of the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. And this discussion will be moderated by Valda Vinson, the Executive Editor of the Science family of journals. So after this moderated discussion for a little bit, as I said, we're going to open up for questions. You people here in the audience, there's 2 microphones on either side, so when it's time, you can come up and use one of those, please. And for attendees online, you can submit questions using the Zoom Q&A function. I'll be monitoring that and sharing them with Valda. So, Valda.
Okay, thank you. And of course, I wasn't listening to that. I was focused on my microphone. Okay. Okay, thanks so much, Michael. And thank you so much, Joe. That was just a wonderful presentation. And I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions coming from the audience, but we just want to start off with a few questions that I have. So first of all, I'm going to start the first one as kind of a lightning round because I want to get to the other questions. And so just to break the ice on an easy one, considering the past 175 years, what are the most significant innovations in food and agricultural science that have caught your imagination? So Joe, you kind of told us yours during your talk, yeah. Yeah, but do you want to go? Just go ahead.
Sure. I'll take one off your slide, which is the Haber-Bosch nitrogen fixation. That's obviously gigantic. Then I'll choose one that's low tech, which is the creation of the Agricultural Extension Service in the United States. That is putting scientists in counties around the country. And as someone who believes in science engagement and the need for scientists to be a part of communities, that program is probably the one that creates the closest bond between a scientist and the citizens of this country. So I'll say that.
That's a good one. Okay, we'll go with Saharah Moon.
Yep. Sort of thinking really big picture, I could just rattle off 3, and that's crop and animal improvement is the first. Mechanization, reducing drudgery and enabling people to farm more. And finally, refrigeration, so that people can have food and not need to be so close to the land.
Great. And Joe, do you want to give us another one other than Haber-Bosch that was in your talk, right?
Well, if I step back and if I could only pick 2, which is really difficult because they're all sort of interrelated, I would say selective breeding. You know, the fact that we've actually been able to improve really the entire food supply around the world. And the second would be nutrition. our understanding of the linkage between cause and effect between the foods we eat and our health.
And Dan?
So I'm at a disadvantage being the last on this kind of question. And in fact, Sudip touched on one that I would have said, which is the evolution of higher education to provide knowledge, to be a place where the next generation is trained, and the extension services as part of that. But I would do sort of a throwback as well and talk about soil mapping and how we use and understand our landscapes. I had a good colleague who was a GIS sort of scientist, and he used to say that everything is somewhere. And until we understand all those places where we live, where we grow crops, and how different kinds of soils and landscapes intersect with breeding and fertilization and all those kinds of things, we really don't know how to use our resources properly. So I'll go with soil mapping.
That was just such an amazing list, and talk about multidisciplinary. It was beyond science to policy to social science. It was really an exciting, list of. It shows that everyone has to work together, right, to make anything work. So then, Sudip, I have one for you, especially for the 175th anniversary. So science and the scientific enterprise have obviously changed a lot over the last 175 years. And I don't think that the founders would necessarily have imagined having you sit in there as our CEO. But not everything has changed. For example, we're celebrating a great man from 1868, right? So reflecting on this evening's program, what do you think the founders would still recognize today?
Wow. So I said that in 1848, 87 guys got together in Philadelphia. They were all white men from North America. And, they, having read some of the history of that time, they're relatively what we'd call progressive, I guess, for the day. But would they have imagined that this organization, the AAAS, the thing that they founded, would have a board that is majority women, or that would have a board that reflects the diversity of America, and yet still has Nobel Prize winners and National Academy members and captains of industry? Probably not. You're right. They probably wouldn't have recognized their CEO being Sudip Parikh. But here's the part that makes me optimistic about things is that over 175 years, this place has evolved and had the evolution and the revolutions that are required to make that progress. And in the meantime, scientific advancement has happened such that we are feeding 8 billion people. And so, yes, there are challenges, there are problems, there are things to be extremely upset about, and there are problems even today in the demography of the scientific enterprise. But when I look at it on balance and I say, what makes me optimistic about this? I talked about smallpox, but I could talk about 100 different areas and disciplines where we've been able to pull together as a scientific enterprise. And so I looked at that being still possible, and I think the founders would recognize that.
Yeah. Does anyone want to add anything in your areas, how things have evolved over time, and whether you're hopeful, think we're in a better place or worse place?
Well, I'm personally very hopeful on a number of different fronts. We're making progress. We have a tendency to always look at the cup as half empty versus half full. And if you look back on a number of achievements that have been made on food production, food nutrition, et cetera, we actually have some wins in the column. Now, we don't want to take our eye off the ball because it's always a matter of, and this is agriculture, I mean, the greatest yield potential is the day you plant the seed. And from that day forward, nature is doing everything in its power to take its piece of the pie. And nature doesn't slow down for us or for anyone else. And that's why science and technology are so critically important, just in order to keep us baseline, but also to fill the gaps where we actually need to improve. And I'm super excited by the quality of the students, the teaching education that we have, or the world-class universities that we have. It's still one of our greatest exports is education. And that actually feeds the innovation, the ideas that are going to get us through the 21st century are out there.
Yeah. Dan, would you like to talk to that? Because I hear so many people so concerned about education today, and I also am very hopeful. I see it as an amazing time with huge potential.
So thank you, Valda. There are a whole number of things that we could talk about that I think are relevant here. The first would be that students have always been optimistic. And anybody who works in education has to, by definition, be optimistic, because we're about the future, about adding value, about making things better. And so I think if you're ever suffering from lack of optimism, go to a campus, go to a high school, go look and see what young people are thinking and wanting and doing. And this current generation of students is more engaged and more forward-looking probably than any generation has been. In part because they're also inheriting a much more complicated world that those of us older than 22 have done our part to help, but we've also gotten quite a few things wrong. And so there's a lot of work to be done. That might be my first comment. The second one is that we have some enormous challenges in higher education in general. The mood in our own particular country has shifted about the value of higher education, and we have to work hard to regain some of our social license. A third piece would be that there's always more to know. So who invented the 4-year degree? That's several hundred years ago. And even 50 years ago, students took more credits to earn their first degree than they do today. But arguably, there's more information to know today. So we're swimming in this sea of information. And one of our challenges with respect to any discipline, but certainly with respect to agriculture and the fundamental underlying sciences that lead to agricultural practice, is how do we sort the information? How do we train and graduate lifelong learners so they know how to filter information and access it and put it to good work? Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves sort of diffuse and not making the kind of progress at the kind of speed that we know we need. So these are some of the challenges and the opportunities we have.
Well, an exciting time. I guess we want challenges. Saharah Moon, I'll move on to you. I don't want to spend too long on each question. So I think we've talked here, a lot has come up about collaboration, and the 2023 Global Agricultural Productivity Report also highlighted the need for collaboration between the public and the private and the civil sectors. So I'm just interested in how your foundation plays a role here.
Sure. So I work at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. We were established in the 2014 Farm Bill to build public-private partnerships to support food and agriculture research. And given this very specific and very cool funding model that every dollar we receive through the Farm Bill, we have to match it with a non-federal dollar. So we truly cannot work without establishing partnerships. And one of the most exciting ways that we have done that, I think, is through our consortia, where we bring together players, sometimes competitors in the same space. We have our Crops of the Future consortia, which brings together seed companies to co-invest in research together in the pre-competitive space. And by working together, they de-risk that investment. So no one company is shouldering the burden of funding that innovation and the investment that the whole sector needs. Some of our others bring players together up and down the value chain. Our Greener Cattle Initiative brings together the science companies, the farmer groups, and industry and dairy and beef to focus on reducing enteric methane emissions from cattle, obviously an important goal in terms of reducing the impact of agriculture on the environment.
That's fascinating. And I guess that's a lot. Gates Ag 1 does this similar kind of bringing people together, right? So can you give us an example of these kind of cooperations?
So it's really important whenever we design a program to affect change. It's a grounds-up exercise for us, where we look at what's the problem we're trying to solve, what are the technologies or the potential avenues that would allow us to actually have an impact in that arena, and then assessing what's the size of that potential impact. Because it's really important that, like everything in life, that we're very selective about the things that we do. And once we identify a program that is of interest, then we cultivate relationships beyond the initial phase where we're basically doing due diligence. Then the next phase is to actually reach out and identify globally what's the current state of the science in that arena. And we reach out and actually actually convene those audiences, and those audiences actually help co-design what that solution mix would look like. All the time we're continuing to make sure that we include the stakeholders, as I said in the presentation, farmer first. Mm-hmm. We have to know exactly who we're trying to affect in the agricultural landscape. And it's also important for us to make sure that the partners we have in that design, build, and test model represent the geographies that we want to actually affect that change. And then, so that is a collaboration model where we're collaborating across public and private sectors with local and global partners and developing a program that actually is addressing all those pain points to ensure that the technologies that we're developing or co-developing with local sponsors are fit for purpose.
Right. So this is your open innovation, right?
This is absolutely an open innovation model.
Right, right. So Sudip, that kind of makes me think of some of the things AAAS does, right? So global, and so could you just talk to that a little?
Yeah. Can I ask a question to the audience?
Sure.
So how many of you work in government? Raise your hands. All right. How many of you work in academia? Fabulous. How many of you work in industry? Fabulous. How many of you work in nonprofits? All right. All right. Those are all the AAAS people. How many of you are students? Yeah, so just the cross-section of this room is extraordinary, right? And it tells you that that this is a space that all these sectors come together. And what gets me excited, this stage, every night of the week, almost every night of the week, you might find astrophysicists here, or you might find, and Sunday night we had neuroscientists here. And in all those fields, I feel this sense of we know more about the universe, the planet, and ourselves than we've ever known before. And that the pace of discovery has actually been moving incredibly quickly. And so when I think about what are the commonalities amongst all those fields, it is that cross-sector collaboration, this idea that scientists alone in rooms are not what's doing this. It's the fact that there's innovation going on in the models, the business models. There's innovation going on in bringing different types of science together, as Joe talked about. There's innovation going on in how these things are deployed in terms of business models to farmers. And that is what gets me all excited. Now, what scares me to death is that we're in this race. We're in this race between all that good stuff that's coming. And you students, you're going to fan out, and some of you are going to do research, some of you are going to go into business, and all those things are great, and we need every bit of that. But we're in this race because there's a whole part of society that doesn't realize that we're living in a golden era of science. And we are living in a golden era of science. And so when I think about that cross-sector collaboration, when I think about the pace of innovation, the pace of discovery, the pace of invention, all three of those things, I get just so optimistic. And then I know that we've got to make a connection with the folks who don't see this happening. And farmers are among that group, right? I mean, this is a lifestyle of living by the cycles of the world, and that can seem like it's an ancient process, but in fact, it's changing every day and changing in ways that are noticeable and not. And we've got to make sure that we're making that connection. So I'm excited about it.
So we don't have too much longer. I want to get a question into Dan. Dan, this is going to one of the challenges that the innovation has to address, and that historically increasing product yield has been a big deal, of course, but often it's been done by putting in more resources and using more resources per land area, and that's led to increased costs and long-term environmental challenges. So as we're trying now to increase productivity, how can we avoid these sort of mistakes that have been made as we go into Africa and well, as people in Africa try and increase productivity to meet the needs of a growing population? What do we do here?
That's a really great question, and I certainly don't have all the wisdom to know what we should do. I would reflect on it this way, though. It strikes me that since the post-World War II era, right up until today, we have achieved enormous gains in productivity and efficiencies in our agricultural systems, and it's amazing that we can feed many people, not all. We still have an enormous portion of the world which goes to bed hungry. 30% of Americans are food insecure. We have a lot of work to do. And let me remind you that as our population grows, we're now 8.1 billion, we'll go to 9 or something like that, maybe north of 9. It's not that we should be satisfied with a one-to-one increase in the amount of food we produce, given an increase per capita of people. Most people in the world don't consume enough of anything. So by some rough number, maybe 60% of the world lives on less than $5 a day. They need to consume more of everything. They need to consume more food, more nutritious food, more education, more health care, more of everything. Arguably, some of us in the more affluent part of the world, we could consume less and still have high standards of living, but we could be more efficient. I think on the landscape where we produce food, where we gain the benefits of our environment, the challenge for us, and our science leads us in this direction, is to find ways to reimpose complexity in our environment while still achieving these increasingly high rates of productivity that we need, right? So in the post-World War II era, we really simplified our agricultural systems in order to gain productive advantage, and it's been a great success. Green Revolution has been a huge success. We need a complexity revolution now where we find ways, using science, to reimpose complexity on our landscapes and our ecosystems so we can continue to advance productivity and yet still achieve or re-achieve some of the environmental values that provide for sustainability, biodiversity, clean water, and all these kinds of things. It's difficult to do in a simplified landscape. We don't have to sacrifice productivity or profitability, I believe. We can find new ways to impose complexity on our landscapes. And that's a challenge for us.
Yeah, we want to get to questions from the audience, so I'm going to stop it there, but just do a final flash round to end. So what new technology or innovations do you think will be most important to advance sustainable agriculture across the world going forward? Saharah Moon, why don't we start with you?
Well, I can pick up on where Dan left off, which is that we need those innovations that will allow us to produce more using fewer resources. And going back to your theme on convergence, this is what gets me excited about agriculture, is that we do need these different disciplines coming together. And we do need to position agriculture not just to be less impactful and to do less damage, but what excites me about agriculture today is the opportunity for agriculture to be a solution. And so the innovations that will allow us not just to produce more food or fiber or fuel on less land using fewer resources, but actually to do so in a way that restores the environment and that actually could, in some instances, be a net drawdown of greenhouse gases and can restore the soil. So to me, I'm not going to call out a specific innovation, but it's the suite of innovations and it's the suite of disciplines that need to come together to deliver there.
And all the rest, you just get one. So
I'm just going to say ditto. Agriculture is solution. That's a great answer.
So I'm going to frame it up with a statement that actually a friend of mine shared with me. A statement several weeks ago someone shared with me. And his comment was, today every farm is an experiment station. Think about that.
Yeah.
Every farm is an experiment station. with the sensor technology, the data analytics, the machinery that we have, we are collecting data at a pace and scale that never before was imaginable.
Wow, that's
And
amazing, yeah.
one other thing I just want to add, kind of building on some about technology innovation, the number one attribute all of us need is humility. 2 weeks ago, I was in a field in Nigeria. I learned more in 4 hours walking that field with a farmer than I could have learned in the Library of Congress for a week. So humility is job one for all of us as scientists, researchers, developers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Dan, do you want one more word? No? Okay, because Michael's looking at me. Okay, so I think we're opening it to the audience. So if you have a question, come to the mics.
Thank you, all of you. This has really been wonderful, and thank you to the AAAS. My name is Elizabeth Stallwork. I work for Lewis Burke Associates. I 100% agree. Everything you've said, agriculture, food, we have some really wicked, sticky problems and big challenges that need interdisciplinary solutions. Could each of you tell me who should be at the table, who's not? Who have you tried to get at the table who's still not here?
We should probably defer to y'all three.
Yeah. You want to go around this way? Yeah, Dan, you want to start?
I think we got a table full. I mean, you know, at a university, we're an open house, so bring it on. I feel like we are speaking with and speaking to and hearing from a vast array of contexts and opinions and perspectives. There are more out there, no doubt, but I think at least speaking for the sector that I understand, higher education, that we're doing quite a good job listening and hearing and trying to be heard. But it's an important question. Thank you.
I think it depends which table you're at. I think that we often hear that farmers need to be at the table, and I'm actually very heartened by the fact that they often are at the table. So I think that's great progress. I think it depends what conversation you're having. I think often consumers aren't at the table. Consumers drive all of this in the sense of what they want to buy. I think what they want to buy is often informed or pressured by other forces, right? So a consumer only knows what they know, but I think informed consumers need to be at the table so that they can convey what they want to see and what they're willing to pay and what they would like and how they would like their food to be grown and raised. So I think that's an important addition.
I'll just say that in every sector, everything that I've every time I've asked this question on any area, what I say is that there's an uneven distribution of that access to those tables. And so there's just realities in America about the geographies, the identities, the incomes of folks that are at the table. And I'll just put it in terms of farmers. There are very different kinds of farmers out there. There are giant industrial farms. There are family farms. There are farms that are that have been in African American hands for a very long time, and the challenge is, how do you get representation that works for each of those sizes, and that's a challenge in every science, every field, and one that we have to work on.
My only build on that is that it really needs to be bespoke for the technology and the geography. And if you look at who should be at the table, the mix in Ethiopia is going to be different than the mix in Uganda, and it's going to be different than the mix in Peru. And so we have to have the bandwidth to actually be able to engage a broad landscape of stakeholders and embrace that complexity and be willing to actually look at technology through the lens of bespoke. The industrial model is create a widget and get it out there, as cheap and in Broadway as you can. Agriculture is different. The technology that is needed on this farm and the technology that's needed 100 miles down the road is oftentimes different, and we have to be able to manage that.
Thank you. So I think we'll take the question from this side now.
Thank you very much for your presentations. This has been very informative. I'm a AAAS fellow. I'm currently in the Office of the Chief Scientist at the USDA. My question is in relation to the process of technology deployment. And the Green Revolution, while it was incredibly beneficial to increase yields around the world, it was not beneficial for all. And when I say all, I mean especially small farmers, farmers of color, indigenous peoples, were some of the losers in that technology deployment. And so within the context of the Gates Ag 1 and all the technologies that you just shared with us through the presentation, especially robots, which some of them cost to the tune of $30,000, how is this going to be made available for small farmers? And also, how do we prevent some of the pitfalls that we encountered in the Green Revolution, especially in the United States, and seeing our rural areas just shrink in size and lose all of their population, as we've seen machines and single farmers take over thousands of acres. So how do we bring people back to the land, or keep them on the land if in the case of Africa, so that these smaller farmers continue to thrive while expensive technologies seem to be what you're proposing as a solution? I see a disconnect there.
So my first comment, just to address the question about the cost of the technologies. The technologies that I shared today were meant to actually cover a broad landscape of different potential avenues of development. Also want to be very specific that it's absolutely imperative, and this is for agriculture in general. Agriculture is the last sector to get the innovation because it's so price sensitive. I mean, if you look at the cascade, technologies go through medicine, engineering, aerospace, et cetera, and it's only after 10 years of refinement. It's absolutely imperative, and this goes back to my comment about bespoke, and it goes back to the farmer. I have to know when I'm developing a technology, what's the threshold for that farm community in that particular geography. And that's why those farmers have to be at the table, they have to be part of the design process, they have to be part of the build process, and they have to be part of the test process. And at every step, because actually, if we don't design products that are fit for their purpose, they're dead on arrival. So we have to get to a place where we're not creating shoes. We're creating customized products for the producers in the geographies where we want to affect a change. And actually, I'll take one step further. We're not designing, they're designing, and we're cooperating with them.
Yeah, I could add to that. It's a great answer. I think one way to think about it is, let's flip that question on its head, and how do we, kind of like you were saying, how can we ensure that the technologies we're developing are actually those that will reach folks who need them? And a lot of what we've seen today is scale neutral, or could be, and seeds. I think innovations in seeds have been shown to be one of the technologies that can reach the most producers. You know, if done well, they're self-replicating. There's beauty in that, right? My foundation is funding research to develop a millimeter wave sensor, and I actually spent my afternoon trying to learn about what that is because I didn't know that technology. But they have had a breakthrough where they can make these the size of a sesame seed, and it can measure and monitor plant water status. And it is extraordinarily cheap, and the battery life lasts longer. And there's a lot of innovation that went into this. And developing that can be expensive, but the outcome is something that's a sensor that could be very readily accessible to those who need it. And so I think that's our challenge, is to keep our eye on those technologies that can be scalable, that can be cost effective, and that can have that impact.
Yeah, I would just quickly add that your question really points out this perhaps inflection point that we're already in, which is about how do we take what we've learned in an evolutionary sense, and make it better, make it more available to more kinds of people on more kinds of landscapes, cost effectively, and deal with the issues that we have discovered we have. And it's been a grand experiment, right? We don't have a replicated study on how to deploy the Green Revolution in 1960. We did it, and here we are, and I think we have learned many, many lessons, which is what your question points out. And we have our work cut out for us. There is more work to do than there ever has been in order for us to have a sustainable system of food production that will provide people with the resources they need, take care of our environments, protect and preserve communities, and allow communities to evolve as well. So it's we're in that's where we are right now, and that's what we need to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And Dr. Cornelius, thank you so much for a really thoughtful lecture. I'm Kathy Wotecki. I'm a professor at Iowa State University and formerly the chief scientist at USDA and Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics. And Joe, I share your optimism about we can do this moonshot. I'm less sanguine about, at that point in the future, that the food supply is also going to be promoting health and that it is going to have as minimal an environmental impact as possible. If we don't design those endpoints into the moonshot from the get-go. So my question to you and the panel is, with that framework that you provided for us at the end of the lecture, how do we get those dimensions built into this moonshot so that we've got healthy people and a healthy environment also?
Yeah.
No volunteers. So the great thing about science and technology globally is it's dynamic and fluid, which means that we actually have millions of participants in the process and millions of participants that have free will that are actually developing technologies that they fundamentally believe are important in this space. And when asked what I think is going to be the greatest innovation or was the greatest innovation, selective breeding and nutrition. We have to be able to harness these technologies not only to produce more, because that in and of itself is not sufficient. We actually have to enhance the quantity as well as the quality as well as the quantity. And that's understanding human nutrition, livestock nutrition, and I would throw in environmental sustainability, that this is a turnkey, and that's the great thing about genetics, is we actually get to stack benefits into products that we develop. And especially when we start talking about crop and livestock genetics, we're able to actually have multiple endpoints. And we should not be at a place where we're making compromises that impair one at the expense of the other.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a great question. And, I think it ties back to the earlier question about who needs to be at the table. And I think when we're speaking about human nutrition and the foods that people need to stay and be healthy, we have to be talking to the people who are going to be eating those foods and understanding what their needs are. And it ranges from as much as, what foods are culturally appropriate, and they need to be able to express what they would like to see in foods, but also understanding really how people eat and how people access food and where they shop. And so there's a whole body of research around that consumer piece and how it connects back so that their needs are driving the research, not just at the crop and animal and production system level, but the research around how food is processed and how it's packaged. And so that, I think, is such a rich area of research. And it's just so critical that those voices are there. A personal story, I was at the nutrition conference that the White House held last year, And there was talk about how, this was a prominent member of Congress was talking about how we can, help to allow people to get the information they need to produce more food from scratch. And I was sort of sitting there in the audience. I'm a busy professional. I'm a single parent of 2 very picky children. And I try to make a lot of food from scratch, and they just won't eat it. And so I was like, well, that's not what I need. As anyone asked me, I don't know what I need. I need my children to eat nutritious foods when they, will pick out every little green thing from their plate. And so just sort of really understanding and I have every advantage in the world, and I have a good understanding of nutrition, and I have, the ability to purchase whatever foods that we need. And so now take us a working parent of picky children, and she's got 3 jobs, and she doesn't have time to cook food from scratch. And how do you give her the access to the food she needs?
Yeah, that's so important, yeah.
Just a quick plug for multidisciplinarity in that, yes, we need technologies and in agriculture. We need social science. We need people in business and finance to understand what are the business models that would make a large maker of food want to create food that does that, right, and does it in a healthy way. These things have to come together, and that's why for the students in the room, remember that a lot of you are going to be scientists. That's awesome. If you don't want to do the science part in the lab, do it in finance, do it in business, do it in these other spaces where we need your background, and we need you hopefully influencing the directions of those industries as well.
Yeah, I think when people talk about alternate careers, they're so unimaginative.
There's no such thing as an alternative career.
Out there everywhere, right? There's no. So I think we can have one more question from the room.
Hi. Thanks again to the panel members. I'm Don Weber with the Agricultural Research Service, research entomologist up at Beltsville. Evolution features strongly in some of the answers here, talking about selective breeding, for instance. So we consider it as a phenomenon, but also as a tool. But we look at some of our worst problems, like pesticide and antibiotic resistance, and realize we've been using certain tools, but do we really understand the full implications in the way that we implement them? And that's my concern. I'm really excited by the innovations, but do we really have the means to properly implement? And I appreciate, Sudip, your reference to we've made some mistakes. How can we avoid those mistakes in implementation so we don't end up with these, what Fred Gould has called, wicked problems?
Who wants to take that first?
I'll keep it short, and I'm just going to say it starts with humility. All right, so I'll pass it on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Humility is one, knowing that we have the ability to scar the landscape as much as we have the ability to heal it. One technology that gets me excited about that question, Don, is digital twinning. We have, for the first time in our history, the ability to actually create models that are incredibly precise and accurate. And we should be, we do it with weather, we do it with human body, we do it with disease. These are technologies that we should be implementing in systems like agriculture to think about, gosh, if you do something, what is the likelihood of mutation? What is the likelihood of spread beyond the geography in which you're using it? All kinds of things I can't think of. And so we have some technologies that should be put in use as well, but this first idea of humility, I think, is the key cultural aspect.
Yeah.
I would just add, and this comes along with optimism. So I think we recognize more of the struggles we have than we ever have before, and that when we were learning to deploy new kinds of pest management and pest control, there was some recognition, yeah, we might have a problem downstream, but we didn't fully understand it. I feel like we are, as a collective body, feeling like we are better understanding and thinking about the downstream implications of our decisions and how we apply technologies than ever before. Are we as good as we should be? No. And we're 175 years now for AAAS. 175 years from now, this conversation will still be happening. Different people, maybe some of us, different people will still be here having the same conversation about how do we use technology, how do we deploy it. And I think optimism suggests that we're getting better at it. We're not 100% there. I'll give you one quick example. In Iowa, we have a brand new initiative called the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative, and it's about how we use nitrogen from Haber-Bosch or other kinds of processes on our landscape. And the typical approach to prescribing nitrogen fertilization in corn has been, it's been called for many years, maximum return to nitrogen. And that's intuitively pleasing. Well, let's get as much as we can out of it. And we are redefining that to optimal return to nitrogen. And if you just think about the switch of those two words, and there's an enormous amount of science behind this, it's coupling new kinds of field trials with process models to really better understand how on the landscape, based upon where you are and what your productivity goals are and so on, how you should optimally fertilize, not just pursue maximum return. That's a sea change over the last 40 years, and we're doing that. And the same, I believe, is happening in pest management and in nutritional sciences and so on. And so we just need to keep on pushing forward, and we're going to get better at this.
Saharah Moon, do you want a closing thought here?
Well, sure, I'll add one thing to it, which is a plug for investing in evaluative research. I think we often talk about monitoring, evaluation, and impact assessments in terms of how can we go out and make sure that we're capturing all the amazing things that our research has accomplished. But I think along the way, you also learn about what your research hasn't done or what it's done that you don't want it to do. So I think that investing in the sort of after, while you're doing it and after the fact, really understanding the impact of your investments is important.
Yes.
And fund the Agricultural Research Service, Don.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
On that note, all right, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for helping to celebrate our 175th anniversary, and to our panel.